Hard to believe we've already done 15 Endurance Matters episodes. It's been such a fun project to be able to talk to these guests, amazing conversations, and amazing athletes across the board. But before we dive into our Season 2 2025 episodes, let's have a bit of a look back at some of the best moments from Season 1 in 2024. First up, we had young Ironman stud Trevor Foley. He manifested so much in this episode. We talked about what his goals and dreams were for the 2024 season, and he was actually able to go out and execute upon those goals. And it was really impressive to watch him in this episode, but then also be able to transfer that thought process and those abilities onto the race course. You know, so I've asked you about the 6-month goal. What's the 6-year goal? When you're my age, so I'm 30. Yeah. I'm turning 31 in just a couple weeks now. 30 hit me pretty hard. It'll hit you hard when you get there. Sure. What's the goal? Where do you want to be when you're 30 years old, when you're my age?
Yeah, I think I have this like massive plan in my head of what I want to do. I want to build like a massive brand and a massive team. So like an age group team. I want to build a massive age group team, and then I want to build like a massive or a big like semi-pro team as well. I want to coach pros as well. I want to coach guys, trying to win Ironman races. And then eventually I want to, take all that revenue and all that money and build like a training compound kind of. Like I want to have like a track, and I want to have like a pool, and I want to have like this whole centralized place where like all my people can train. And then like be with the same sponsors forever and have like those sponsors sponsor that. Like that's kind of what I want to build. I want to build this big community and team. And yeah, that's because I love coaching. Like I've been coaching myself for years, so I love it. And then from an individual standpoint, like my own career, I don't know. I think I can be one of the best top 5, top 10 guys in the world. Can I do that? I don't know. I think I can. So I've 22 was my first year as a pro. I was 40th in the world. Last year was second year, and I was 30th. So maybe I can be 20th in the world this year. Just kind of moving up. Obviously, it gets harder the higher you move up. But just being remotely, like, in the conversation to be one of the best guys in the world. And then, I don't know, if I get a lucky year and it all comes together, be one of the best to be on the podium. So I think that's kind of a 6-year goal.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is just being super consistent. Yeah. Like, I think you just got to keep, I said it before, you just got to keep showing up year after year. And I think you're starting from such a solid place that if you just get like 1% better and you can avoid injuries and stuff, you're going to be a star. Like that's the track.
Yeah. My baseline was thankfully so much higher than a lot of other people. So like, and that's the other thing too. Like I know what I was doing 2 years ago, and I just got to get a little better, like you said, every year. And then, like you said, stay healthy. Yeah. And I think I can get pretty close to where I want to be.
Next, we shifted gears to Alexei Vermeulen. He's a professional cyclist racing the off-road series, and it was a really insightful conversation for me to get an inside look into sports marketing and what it takes to be a professional cyclist in 2024. From the outside looking in, I don't know a ton about the gravel in the off-road world, but it does seem to me, just like paying attention to your social media and the gravel scene from afar, that it's very similar to long course triathlon, where you need to create your own brand. Like you said, you're on the hook for everything. You're your own travel agent, business manager, agent in most cases. So like, was that a challenge to get, like, coming from the world tour where everything's kind of like, here it is, was that a challenge, or did you feel pretty natural, like in that role straight away?
It was pretty natural. I'm a very outgoing person, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do when I left the road, right? Like I think it's nice to have this. I'm young. There's not much left to go back. I have like a savings account, and I was like, okay, I'm going to fully dive into this. And so I was very confident that I was worth something, and I just had to prove it. I think the biggest learning experience for me was truthfully learning how to actually be valuable to a company. And I think I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but it took a call with a woman at Carhartt. Pretty much I got on and started pitching, and 10 minutes later she was like, oh, this is horrible.
She said that to you?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
It was just she went over and like started explaining things and why this, why that, and how to look at this. And pretty much her point was, if you go into any call anytime with a sponsor you've never talked to and have an assumption of what they need, you're going to fail.
Totally.
And that's really, really hard to think when you're an athlete. 'Cause you're like, oh, why does it matter? They can just give me $5,000. They're $1 million company. Who cares?
Totally.
But that's not how it works. And the best example I can give of this is, so I was like, during the pandemic, I had a lot of friends I was still living in Michigan, a lot of friends in Michigan, and I was getting connections to these big companies. Like I talked to the vice president of marketing at Ford, I talked to Carhartt, I talked to like some big Michigan companies. And I was talking to Ford and got to the point with the guy who's just like, I could give you $100,000 on my budget right now and I wouldn't know it went away. The problem is it would cost me double that to train and hire someone to quantify if you're actually bringing value in for us, and then to be able to find space in our social calendar to promote what you are, which is a small niche.
Yeah.
He's like, not that it doesn't exist. It's that if we come in, we have to come in with millions of dollars and not $100,000, because in the market, that does nothing for us. We have to come in, own cycling, come out.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big realization for me of like, it is relationship based, but it's also, you have to live in reality. You can't live in delusion and think that like people just throw money at you because you do this entertainment thing. And so, I think it was difficult at first, but I had these really good learning experiences that weren't demoralizing. They might have been demoralizing in the minute, but as I've learned, like I would like that kid who felt stupid for not going to college, I would now go up against any of my friends who went to business or marketing school, and I would argue whatever time limit you give us, I could sell more.
Totally. Yeah, it's awesome to hear you talk about that experience, because I had a very similar couple of experiences myself. I remember one with Discover Card. I was like on the phone with an executive at Discover Card and like trying to pitch my case for why triathlon was an important thing for them to pay attention to. And she was just like, I do not understand this at all. And I don't think she said it the same way of like, I could give you $100,000 and I wouldn't feel it. But I think that was kind of the sentiment that I got.
And it's crazy in that moment because you think you know everything, right? You've built this pitch out, you've done the work, you think you've researched everything. You're like, oh, they focused on this and this is why it's important. But you quickly realize when they start talking to you about things of like, oh, there's a reason Red Bull's not a energy drink brand, right? It's a media brand. There's a reason Carhartt doesn't
100%.
view themselves as a clothing brand. It's really hard to know before you have that conversation. And I think that was a big learning experience for me of like, okay, get on the phone, have a conversation, and then try to make a proposal and try to have a real conversation. And from there, you'll make a relationship that will lead to something, or it will just lead to friends.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like also, I talk a lot about because I've had I have a lot of endemic partners and then I've had some non-endemic partnerships, and I'm sure you can attest to the fact that like getting the ones outside of the sport are definitely a lot more difficult. That's where the big dollars are going to likely come from. But if you talk to a wheel company or a bike company or a nutrition company, chances are someone's in that brand who at least gets it or can be a fan of you or can, live vicariously through you. It's a lot more difficult with the with the non-endemic brands, the ones who are outside of the sport. So I'll have to pick your brain a little bit more to see what you do with those.
I mean, I think it's interesting also to tie this all together. Like you watch Unchained come out right on Netflix right now, and it's, for me as a rider, like when it first started watching with my girlfriend, I was like, I hate this. It's so dramatic. It's so like, I can't deal with this. And then slowly I realized like, okay, maybe this is bringing fans or information, education into the sport. And that's what I can hope for, right? Yeah. That it makes it easier for us to have those conversations about non-endemic stuff. Yeah. Because those are the companies that if you spend a year working on trying to explain what it is, the person's probably moved jobs already.
100%.
And that's where it gets really difficult.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously with gravel racing and triathlon, there's this whole additional element of having to build your brand and maintain your brand, continuously fight for what you feel like you're worth and, what the worth of your sport is as a whole. Because, I feel like you and maybe myself are examples in terms of, kind of maybe where the bar should be set. And I always have felt like it's important for us to advocate not only for yourself, but the more you advocate for yourself and the more dollars you can get for yourself, that kind of sets an industry standard. So if you're sitting there taking a lower value across the board, someone who's equal or lesser or lower profile rider, they're not even going to be able to make ends meet,
For sure. And I think the biggest thing when you start talking about that stuff, I think, is if I can convince young riders that getting results is just the validation that you're working with that company, that's not a return on investment at all.
Totally.
And the minute you can realize that of like, hey, that's me validating why I'm here. Yeah. Now I have to return the investment. I have to go sell bikes, or I have to explain or bring new customers in. Yeah. That's where the real understanding happens. And that is unquantifiable to a point. Yeah. But we all know it. It's a feeling. It's a gut feeling of like, I'm doing a positive thing for this company and we're moving forward,
Yeah.
or it's, it's not working for this or this reason or the other, and we got to work on something.
Yep. Unexpected guest in the studio for episode 3 was Dean Karnassus, who's an absolute legend in the ultra running community. In this episode, it was an absolute delight to be able to peel back the curtain and understand what makes his mind tick on these ultra endurance events. I want to transition a little bit into the mental side of all of these endurance challenges, because I think all endurance athletes, whether you're running a 5K and just getting into it, or doing a 70.3 or a regular marathon, or even getting into an ultra marathon, like during a 100-mile ultra race or something even larger, 200 miles, 350 miles, how are you either truncating that and segmenting it, or how are you just staying present in each mile? How does that process work for you?
I think that's the key, is staying present. People say to me a lot, what do you think about when it gets tough? And I think thinking is the problem. I think that just do. So when I hit the wall, the quote unquote wall, what I really try to do is not to think about anything. Put on the blinders to the next aid station, or, the next mile mark or whatever. Don't reflect on the past. Just think about one thing, taking my next footstep to the best of my ability. Sure. And then my next footstep to the best of my ability. And it takes some discipline, right? Our minds are so active. Even now, as we're talking, we're having a one-on-one conversation, you're thinking about what's the next question, did I turn off the lights at home, whatever. So to really focus on your next footstep, you have to be present, and you have to pull your mind into that place. And I can do that for 8 or 9 hours sometimes, especially in these longer runs where I'm just thinking about one thing, next footstep, next footstep. I'm not thinking how much further I've got to go. In an Ironman, you know it's ahead of you, right? There's no mystery in this. But when you're suffering, you're just looking for an out. Like, where's the next aid station? Where's when's the next hash mark going to come? Whatever. If you can just tune out of that, your body is really amazing. And the human body is capable of so much more than I think we understand. But we have these self-conceived limitations we place on ourselves. And if we can just move out of the way of that, we can keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you trying to skew, you said you're not really thinking about anything, you're just trying to stay focused. Is there anything that you find yourself gravitating towards if you do to combat maybe like a negative emotion? If you're at mile 30 of a 100-mile ultra race and you think, there's no way I'm getting through 70 miles, is there like a combative force, or are you just trying to get back to neutral, like a combative positive force?
I have to say, I think experience helps a lot, because I know how bad it's been before. And so now when it gets to that place, I kind of celebrate it. I'm like, sure, this is fucking miserable. Have you ever been this miserable before? No, right on. This is the most miserable you've ever been. Like, this is horrible. Like, I've never felt this horrible.
Sure.
And there's a great thrill if you can reach the finish line. Like, I overcame that. So,
totally.
The next time this happens, you realize I've been here before. I got through it. You can probably get through it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was seeing something the other day that kind of like resonated with me, and that like the human brain and the human body is programmed to seek comfort. And the minute you're constantly trying to seek that comfort, you're just always going towards that. But the celebration is in that hard moment when you kind of get your ass kicked and you are faced with a demon that you maybe haven't been faced with before, and you either, take it head on, or you kind of fall back into the maybe more comfortable area. So it's cool to hear that you are embracing that moment pretty intensely. Sponsor of today's episode, Precision Fuel and Hydration. These guys have been an amazing partner for the show, and it's really a product that I use every single day in my training to help me go faster, feel better. So in today's day and age, we all know high carb is sort of the thing. And so previously I've spoken about how much I like the chews, and I'm still munching on those pretty much every single day in training, but I've really been getting into the PF90 gels. That's been a really big value add for me to have 3 gels in one. And I feel like sometimes I'll just take that entire gel all at once or go half and half. It just allows me to get a little bit more carbohydrate and sort of just bump everything up and feel a little bit better in training. So if you want to try that for yourself, head on over to pfnh.com and use code BigMetz2025 for 15% off. Taylor Knibb, absolute superstar in endurance sports right now, one of the best female athletes on the planet. So I don't take for granted the fact that we were able to get her on the show so early on, and it was really cool to be able to share that experience with my wife Jeannie, who co-hosted the episode. In this one, we were able to really dive into some of the things that make Taylor tick, and we were able to showcase a side to her that not that many people know. I want to talk a little bit more, and I know Jeannie's going to be excited to get into this section. because she was helping me prepare for the podcast last night, and she was like, "Oh yeah, this section's going to be sweet." I want to talk more about your mindset, because obviously you're an incredible athlete. You have amazing attention to detail. You work super hard. You train hard. You've got talent. But I think what sets you apart is your ability to tap into a different zone mentally, and I want to hear a little bit more about that. So, as you get close to a race, how high is your motivation to win the race and just like decimate the field versus maybe having more process-oriented goals and focusing on like, okay, I'm going to try and just swim in this place, bike this power, run this pace, and whatever happens, happens?
Well, I think a huge piece of like what motivates me is seeing how good I can be. And so like training might indicate certain things, but you just never know. And so, for example, like the time trial in Charleston, Dan gave me like a zone, like a 20 watt range of like watts that I could hit. And I was like, that just seems really low. And he's like, well, like you can always go higher if you want. But like, he's like, so like we went to RPE and I was well above the range, because I'm like, please don't underestimate me. But it's also like learning. But that's the thing. It's like tapping into what you think you're capable of and like answering the question, are you or aren't you? And like, because like training can indicate something, but you kind of have to do it to do it. And so it's like, that's why I love the racing. And it's like to see, and you know what, sometimes I fell short. Sometimes I exceed expectations of both me and my coach or coaches. But like, that's the fun part of racing, is kind of seeing where you are. And so then with that being said, like the toughest part for me is going into a race where like either I know where I am, I'm not happy where I am, and like I don't feel like I'm as good as I want to be or should be. And then it's kind of like, those are the tougher races, because it's like you still want to get the best out of yourself on that day. That's an important process, an important skill. But when the numbers aren't as exciting, it's not as exciting. Sorry, like I don't want to. It just it's tougher.
Any athlete would agree with that for sure. So,
do you feel like there's an element of just what you say to yourself, like self-perpetuates a little bit? So if you're going into the race saying, oh, well, my numbers are maybe a little bit lower, I don't know what my performance is going to be at this one, so therefore the performance is average in your mind. But if you go in saying, oh, wow, like my coach is giving me these low numbers, I know I'm going to demolish that, you go in there and demolish it just to prove a point because you've told yourself that's the truth.
Yeah, I the demolishing, I still don't, I don't think I think I race more from a place of joy. And like, I was reading a book, and it talked about how like all powerful emotions are powerful, like hence why they're powerful emotions. So like, it's like, that's a bit redundant, but it's like, it's how you tap into them. And so like extremely negative emotions like anger, or even sadness, those have power. And so, but I don't tap into those as well as like joy and excitement for the sport. Like that's kind of more where I tap into it. So again, the demolishing, not sure about that, but also it's not, I feel like it's not proving a point. It's just kind of like expressing yourself and seeing what's possible. And you just never know. And I've also I've had times where I thought I was training amazingly and then the races didn't go well, and then vice versa. And so there's no direct comparison, and that's where you kind of have to have a little bit of hope always. Yeah. That's dangerous though, because it can lead to disappointment, but
it's true. It's true. Do you feel like you have a lot of natural confidence? Like when you're heading into a U.S. time trial national championship, which you've referenced, which is where you qualified for the Olympic time trial. Do you go into that with hope, or is it confidence and self-belief?
It's more exploration. So I actually messaged Dan the night before the race, and because I was so nervous about the start ramp. I was nervous about how it would go. I had just been to Yokohama. I had some other like personal things going on, and so I just didn't know how I was going to race. And also where you're going to stack up, because I've never raced these women. I don't know how I stack up against them, and I have full respect for them. And I'm like, Dan, I really don't want to embarrass you. Like, this is his world of cycling. Like, I don't want to embarrass him in any way, shape, or form. And he's like, oh, don't worry. This should be like the lowest pressure race of your year, because like you're a cyclist. Like he even said, he's like, imagine these women on the start line of a WTCS race and how they might be feeling. He's like, there is no reason for you to put any pressure on yourself. Like, and so I think it's also like, maybe like the best thing is being honest with those around you about how you're feeling, regardless of how that is before a race. And then they can help you or not. But like just putting it out there, like this is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm worried about, this is what I'm excited about, and just like sorry, I just am who I am in a way, and that's like liberating because it's like you're gonna get everything whether you want it or not.
No, we
that's good.
appreciate it.
For
That's
sure.
good.
My interview with Tim O'Donnell was a special one for me. Longtime friend and longtime training partner. It was great to reconnect in the studio and ask him some questions that I've asked him a million times on the bike, but to be able to share that on the podcast to all of you was an awesome experience. We really spent a lot of time discussing his household dynamic with his wife, Mirinda Carfrae, being 3-time Ironman World Champion, and us sort of resonating on the fact that it can be hard sometimes to be in the same house with a partner who tends to win a lot of triathlons. All right. Well, I do want to talk obviously more about your and Rinny's dynamic. I think Rinny, like, she's such an incredible athlete. She's won Kona 3 times.
Yeah.
I think, like, I want to just highlight your results in Kona first before we talk about that. You know, Rinny won in 2010, 2013, 2014. You were, I don't know the exact years, but 4th, 5th, 3rd, 6th, 4th, and 2nd in Kona.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, I looked it up, so it is right. I think, like, I'm curious to hear more about those years when you guys were both performing so highly in Kona. I think some of your good results, like your second, she was kind of exiting her Kona time. But I could understand, and I have felt it on a lower level, how, like, if your spouse is winning the race, you're going there having insane performances, like arguably as good as anyone else is racing in the world.
Yeah.
Like, were those results getting overshadowed by Rinny winning the race?
Probably, but deservedly so, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, she's still the champ. It's interesting. You look at my best races were probably 15, 18, and 19.
Yeah.
And those were Rinny's worst performances. So to some extent, you wonder, like, is there so much energy in the family? And, you know, it's always been a question for me, you know, like, or the other knows that it's that athlete's turn, or their partner's turn to shine. I don't know. But I remember 2015, I was pretty focused. You know, I've been in the top 5 and kind of like hovering, and I'm like, I gotta make some progress. And then Rinny got hit by a car before the race. And that same night, the guy I was with, we were coming back from a sponsor appearance, and he passed out while driving. So he starts driving on a leahy into the other lane.
Oh boy.
And so I grabbed the wheel, like, pull us back, and then I hit the handbrake. I'm like, oh my God, like, we just almost, like,
drove into the ocean there, or into what's the coffee shop there?
So I'm like, oh my God. So we come back, and I'm like eating dinner by myself, just like, oh, that was horrible.
Yeah.
And then she comes, I hadn't seen her since she got hit by the car. So we're just both kind of sitting quietly at the dinner table, like, what is going on?
Totally. Yeah.
But I knew I'm like, all right, this is my year. Like, I gotta, it's almost like there was, like, I was going through my stuff, she was going through her stuff, and you're like, okay, sorry, right now, like, we're focused internally.
Yeah.
And that was a breakout for me with my first podium, and an unfortunate DNF for Rinny. But honestly, at that time, she was thinking about having a family too. So that was a tough year for her, because she really wanted to step back and start a family. And then the DNF kind of forced her to go back in 16 before taking a break to have kids. So that was a tough time for her too.
Yeah. It is kind of an interesting one. I mean, at least from my perspective, it's kind of a bummer, because that's just how it works in the pro triathlon couple sphere, like, very, very rarely. And I know you guys feel this too. Are you both hitting it at the same time? That's on, like, the macroscopic level of, like, just every day to day. And then there's also this, like, very intense microscopic level of, like, just both nailing it at the same day, at the same time, at the same race. I think it's easier to do at some lower level races. Like, Jeannie and I have done that before, where we can both go to a 70.3x and both maybe win or get on the podium, and we're, like, all stoked and excited. But when it comes to maybe both of us preparing for a championship race or a big Ironman or something, like, it's so difficult. And I think, at least what we found, or what I've viewed, is, like, there's just this, it's not necessarily a discussion of, like, oh, okay, this year you get 30% and I'm going to take 70%. And then next year it'll flip and you get 70%, 30%. It's kind of just, you, like, ride this wave or this arc of, like, if you're just on it, the energy balance flows that direction.
totally.
And then like it just kind of works its way back. And over the course of a marriage, you know, Jeannie and I have been together, married for 5 years. You guys have been married, you know, a long time too. Like it works its way out in the end.
Yeah, it's almost like the water flows in the path of least resistance, right?
sure.
And the energy in the household kind of sees, you know, hey, this person's on, right? Like it's going, like that's the right direction to flow.
Yeah, for sure. And you also like, from a business perspective, you kind of need to capitalize upon that, because if you invest the resources and the energy in the person, you need to help them enough to help them get out of the muck, or out of the tough time, or out of the injury, or out of the funk. But you can't go so far, because like you need to put the resources where you can to, you know, like make it work when you're hot, you know?
And I think that's a benefit too. I think I was able to focus more on Kona because we, you know, both of us had established partnerships and some financial stability, whereas a lot of athletes, they want to do well at Kona. They have the ability to do really well in Kona, but either out of greed or necessity, they've chased the money. And another thing I learned from those younger years, 2009, 2010, I was chasing the races, chasing the money, and also subsequently burning myself out in the process, right?
100%. Yeah, it's not easy. Brazilian professional triathlete Andre Lopez popped in the studio. This was an awesome interview because I've spoken to this guy many times on the bike about philosophy and life, and it's really awesome to see his positivity, and he showed that in this interview. He gives great lessons on how to overcome obstacles and generally how to have a great perspective on things. One thing I've always kind of like, you know, just as a friend and as like a fan of all my friends and you know, triathlon in general, like one thing I've really admired about you is kind of like your outlook and perspective. Like you've always been so optimistic, generally positive, stoked on triathlon. Like you're always willing to push hard. Is that something that you naturally possess, or do you wake up in the morning and be like, no, I'm going to be super positive today and push myself?
No, I think that's like kind of like one of my fortes, I guess. Like I'm very positive guy. I always try to like, I mean, there's always somebody having a worse day than yours, to be honest. Like if you look like at the broader scheme of things, like, man, we're doing triathlon. We're living in Boulder. Yeah. We're in the freaking mountains. We're not having to sit on a desk job. Yeah. We're doing what we love. Like we're 30 years old. Like, I mean, there's worse thing happening in the world right now. So like, I'm always trying to look, Rachel doesn't, like my girlfriend doesn't really like when I say this, but like, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's something that I always try to keep in mind, like that there's other things going on in the world that is a lot worse than what we're doing right now, even though if you're going through a rough patch or like something that is not really happening for you right now, like are not going your direction, I feel like, that's when I'm having a bad day, I'm trying to think about other stuff and like just put triathlon in perspective so I can like focus on and actually have a good vibe for the day, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have to like actively recalibrate, or is it something where you're just like, it's natural for you to be like, okay, this day's going to crap, or I've had a race where something gone really bad and it has, or I'm underperforming, or I didn't finish the race, or I'm sick, or I'm hurt, or whatever. Like a good example is last week you fell off your bike and crashed. Like, are you able to get right back up and be like, no, I'm going to focus on the positive. I'm going to get healthy. I'm going to use this as a little reset. Like it's what I needed anyways. Like what's the thought process?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely comes and goes. Of course, there's some moments where it's like, oh my God, like I'm having a hard time getting over this. Like, but yeah, like something like the crash is like, oh, you went down. Like there's nothing you could have done about it now. Like you're already down, you're already hurt. Good thing you didn't break anything. So that's a positive. Okay, let's focus on the healing because you cannot do anything else. Let's try to recalibrate and focus. But I think all that stuff comes very natural for me because like, I know triathlon is not everything in my life. I really love and breathe triathlon. I want to be the best version of myself. But like, I know at the end of the day that I don't need to be a world champion to be fulfilled, to be happy for the rest of my life. Like I just want to be the best version of myself. And if that's like a stone in the way, like I just have to deal with it and like just try to move on. But like, yeah, it's definitely like the challenges are like also like opportunities for you to grow. I feel like you come a lot stronger out of like harsh moments or challenges. The challenges you have to overcome, they're gonna actually like, I mean, it's crazy, but if you get people that are coming back from injury, like, I mean, Lucy Charles, like they always come and like they have that fire inside them burning so hard. So I think you got to use the challenges and the struggles as fire to the fuel, and that's all I try to like. Okay, you've done this, like you already went through this 1 or 2 times in your life, so you can do it. Yeah. Just try to focus one day, another dollar, just another one day, one day in front of the other, man, and like you gotta overcome it. Everything shall pass. So that's one of the other phrases that I always think about myself, like everything shall pass.
Yeah. What's the other one you told me all the time? Calm water never made a skilled sailor.
Yeah, a calm water never made a skilled sailor.
Yeah, he tells me that all the time.
That's all. When you're on peak to peak, getting like blown all by the wind, like I feel like that's like, yeah, you're not gonna get better on your bike if you don't ride in the wind, my man.
100%. I remember running in 2020, and you said that to me for the first time, and I was like, I like used that as a mantra in Ironmans. I was like, oh, calm water never made a skilled sailor. I'm gonna go a little bit harder right now. Yeah. So yeah, that was I always appreciate those little tidbits that you can pick up, and that's also the fun part about having training partners is like sometimes it's just like the little things someone says in training that like just help you tremendously. You know, whether you're in the race or in a hard training session or just trying to like get through it. You know. Next up is Dr. Matt Hansen. He specifically told me not to call him that, but I'm going to do it anyways. And in this interview, it was really cool to be able to get an idea as to how this guy operates on his day-to-day. He's super multifaceted. He's an exceptional athlete, a great coach, a great businessman, and we dive into all of that in this episode. I want to transition a little bit into some questions about your mindset and your approach. You've overcome some injuries in your career. What has been the hardest injury for you to overcome?
I was in Kansas prepping for the World Champs and went out, or the day before I left to Kansas, I did a 22+ mile run, went awesome. Woke up the next morning, couldn't walk, and ended up, just feeling like something was off in the back. It would be fine. So went down to Kansas, and turns out that I had a sacral stress fracture. Not a fun injury to deal with. It's still something that like daily mobility has to be a part of my everyday routine. Otherwise, I still get symptoms from that. Not that the bone isn't healed, but it just kind of irritates the nerves around there and firing patterns and everything. And so that's been an injury that, obviously it cost me an ability to compete at the World Championships, but it's also been one that I have to, constantly get, stay on top of. Otherwise, symptoms come back.
Yeah. How do you know? Obviously, a sacral stress fracture is probably going to be pretty easy to diagnose because the pain is probably going to be pretty bad. But for a lot of athletes out there, and myself included, there are these injuries that are kind of in the gray area where you can keep going and maybe you're doing a little bit more damage, but also maybe you're not. And if you manage it, it's going to be okay. How do you know when an injury is going to be too bad?
That's the hardest thing that we have to do, right? Like we always try to convince ourselves that we're fine, especially for races coming up. I think that having somebody in your corner that you can be honest with and talk to, like I see my PT once a week, and I'll tell him everything that's hurting, and he probably thinks I'm a hypochondriac sometimes, but like we just have the conversation, and I have a circle of trust and of people that I need in my corner, and I take their advice very, I'm not going to disregard it. Sure. And I think having that person that can be like, yeah, that might be a little bit more than just take some Aleve and put some ice on it or something like that.
Yeah, 100%. It's a fine balance, because if you keep kind of treading that line of like, pushing it a little bit too much, you can get into trouble pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, we try to make the best decision. That doesn't mean we're always going to get it right? That's the definition of an overuse injury, right? Yeah. Is kind of getting that decision wrong. But being a repetitive and overuse or over distance sport, those things are going to happen, and you just got to try to do the best you can to avoid them.
Yeah, and this is me maybe making excuses for all of us as professionals, but I do feel like there is an added element of pressure when so much of our livelihood is tied into it, so much of our self-worth is tied into the performances. You've invested, 30 hours a week for a year going into a big race sometimes. Yep. And if you have an injury going in, you're just like, okay, I'm just going to forge on and deal with it later. Is it hard if you ultimately make that decision to forge on, are you okay with paying the consequences, or is it still equally difficult?
I mean, anytime you go into a race and don't get the result that you want, it's frustrating, right? Like, you said you're investing 30 hours a week of training plus all the other things. Yep. I mean, we have really 5 opportunities a year to make money, and that's not to make money for this year. It's to make money for the next couple of years, because like partnership deals go on couple year swings, and so I mean, we're probably making the more aggressive or risky decision a lot of times.
Yeah,
but hopefully more times than not they pay off, but they don't always. And you have to be willing to go into a race knowing that if there is risk, you have to be willing to accept the consequences and have the mental capacity to be like, yeah, I knew that going in it might go this way, and it did.
All right, we had Rudy Von Berg in the studio, hot off the heels of his third place in Kona, which was an absolutely epic performance. We spoke in this episode a lot about how he's just been consistent in his training. He puts his blinders on. He does exactly what he needs for himself, and he's just stayed the course to build up to that amazing performance. How did you predict so accurately that your form was in that place, and what was pointing to the fact that a top 5, or in the actuality of the case, a podium was in the cards?
Yeah, I was just kind of more comparing to myself. Like, again, if I look at all the new aero setups the guys have, and the fitness they have or that they show, it's always easy to be insecure and think, oh, well, yeah, actually, or look at your objectives, kind of think they should be a bit lower. But I knew compared to myself, I was hitting really good sessions, as I told you, that 2-hour run off the bike, for example, or some bike sessions. You get to a point in some builds where just the power feels so good and easy, like usually 280 watts for 30 minutes plus for me is quite hard. And when you get to a point where that's just no problem at all, well, then I know on race day I'll be able to push 290, 300 for 4 hours plus. And so I know when I'm at that kind of shape that even though people crush training and looks like they can do 320 for the Ironman, I know they never end up performing like that on race day. So I just know I'll be kind of in that competitive top 5. But I mean, I'm also well aware that a lot of guys can have good races, and I'm really gonna have to be on my game. It's not like, oh, for sure I'm top 5. Like, I'm really concentrated on my process and on getting in my best shape possible. Like, yeah, I know just the whole thing's gonna be quite hard. For the podium specifically, I actually thought I think it's always like that. When you achieve something, you're like, oh, actually it wasn't that bad, and when you're chasing it for years, you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to have this insane performance to be on the podium in Kona. But then when you do it, you're kind of like it wasn't. And that's actually what I think of my performance. I think it was very good on the day. Obviously a lot of guys faded a lot on the run, but it wasn't. I don't feel like I transcended myself, maybe like I mentioned in some past half Ironmans.
Sure.
I did, 290 watts is very good, especially in the heat, and especially being able to run after. But again, I thought actually I was going to have to push 300, so a bit shy of what I thought would be for a podium. And then on the run, well, even a bit more. The run is a bit long, so official time 248. On my Training Peaks marathon time, I had 246.50.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, a bit quicker. Because, for example, you look at Roth marathon times. Technically, on the official time, I'm 5 minutes slower in Kona.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm 1 second a K slower.
Right.
So just 40 seconds slower. It's almost exactly the same. You know? And one was 243 and one was 248. So I think that's important to look at, too. So as I was explaining, just... I don't feel like I executed really well and had obviously a really good race, but I didn't transcend myself and do what I thought I would have to do to be on the podium.
Sure. In a race like that, where you've got such big hitters, Laidlow, Christian, Magnus, are you looping yourself into like your own pre-race thoughts of how the race dynamic's going to go? Or are those guys in your mind, are you intimidated by them at all, I guess is the question.
A little. They were the favorites. Yeah, Christian, Ditlev, and Laidlow, top 3 favorites. Definitely thought if they're on their game, it's going to be very hard to get on the podium if all 3 perform to what they can do. But it's Kona, and a lot of things can go wrong, and that's the sport, right? You can't say, oh, you got 3rd or 5th or whatever because this guy bonked. A big thing of Ironman is not bonking, right?
Oh, of course, yeah.
So obviously you can't say any of that, and executing on the race day is the hardest thing.
For sure.
So, yeah, I mean, they're in the back of your mind. Obviously, they're the best right now. But yeah, again, just you have to focus on your performance, and because what the best out of yourself is the only thing that can potentially beat them.
Sure.
Not worrying about them and trying to follow them or whatever. So,
Chelsea Sodaro needs absolutely no introduction, Ironman World Champion, and she was a real breath of fresh air in the studio. It was amazing to be able to chat to her about multiple different topics. She's a bit of a polarizing figure, and we touch on some of those aspects during this interview. And, you know, she's been at the top of the sport, but I really feel, and she feels as though she still has the best yet to come. 2024, off incredibly strong. You know, you had 2 wins back-to-back, 70.3 Tasmania, Ironman New Zealand. I was actually at Ironman New Zealand, watched you perform incredibly well there. You just dominated the race. When did you feel like you needed to start making some changes to your team? Because like you said, in 2022, it was kind of a tight-knit group. Was it a matter of, okay, now I'm a bigger brand, I have more resources at my disposal, I'm going to take advantage of that? Or did you feel as though in order to get to the next step, you needed to start making some changes?
I think that some things just run their course, and what maybe served us at one point in our lives or work, you know, doesn't serve us later on. And we're all evolving and learning and changing and growing. And, you know, this year I've had a lot of time to reflect on what I want for this next phase of my career. And I was quite overwhelmed with, you know, like the immediate success that came with the Kona win, and it was such a privilege to be able to make a lot of choices about my team and sponsorships. But I think this year I've really gone back to, you know, like a smaller, tight-knit group of people who are really around me for the right reasons and who really want to win, but also care about me as an individual. And like, ironically, I believe that's when athletes perform their best, when the people that they're working with are not in transactional relationships, right? Like, they really lift you up as a human, and they are there for you on the good days and the bad days. And I had to take a hard look at, you know, who I was involved with, and yeah, see if I was on the right path for myself, and made some really big changes this summer. I do not think that I would have made it to the start line in Nice without those changes. I feel really strongly about that. I have, like, this is the happiest I think I've been in my career and the most supported I've felt in my career. In Nice, I was there with Steve, my husband, my mental coach, David Spindler, and my strength coach, Matt Pendola, and just felt so uplifted and joyful. And like, they were all there because they wanted to be there and they believed in me. But no matter how the race went, you know, they would be there the day after and in it with me for the long haul. I think, you know, some of the changes in sponsorship and in coaching, like, I'm not seeing the immediate rewards of that right now. These are like decisions for next year and the year after, and to keep me in this game for the next 5 years. But really excited about where things are headed.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. I think, like, it's cliche, but a happy athlete is a fast athlete. So even if there's not, like, you're seeing a physiological improvement in 2 months' time, yeah, you're not going to see that. But if you are happy, you're going to race better. You're going to enjoy it more. It's going to reap rewards in the short term. And yeah, like you said, you might have not even made it to Nice without those changes. So that's huge. I've mentioned a few times on the podcast, but I'm a huge fan of track and field. So getting the opportunity to interview Drew Hunter was really cool for me. We were able to dive deep into the world of sponsorship and professional running, what it takes to be really competitive in the U.S., and in addition, the sort of ever-changing landscape of NIL and college athletics. I'm curious to hear more about the actual, like, contract itself, because from what the internet says, that was a 10-year contract. Is that correct?
I think it was 9 years.
Okay.
It's so funny that we're actually having this podcast. I'm in, like, my contract's up, and I'm in negotiations now with my agent and with my sponsor to figure out another contract. So it's actually really funny that we are talking about this.
Yeah, because I'm really interested in the business side of the sport. Like in triathlon, you know, the sponsorship's kind of a big deal of, you know, what we do, and it's maybe a little bit different because it's a bit more piecemeal. You've got a lot of different sports going on, and I think the contracts are less significant. I feel like from what I understand with big professional running contracts, it's kind of like enough to sustain you maybe for your life. Whereas in triathlon, those are maybe a little bit more difficult to come across. You kind of have to piece together maybe 5 or 10 smaller sponsors to make it sort of the equivalent of one Nike sponsorship or Adidas sponsorship. But at the time when you sign a 9-year contract, is that something that's going around, like, or is that unusual?
Yeah, very unusual. Most contracts are 2 to 4 years for runners, the Olympic cycle.
Yeah, for sure.
That's sort of how, if you're coming out of college and you've run pretty well, you're an All-American, and the Olympics are in 2 years, a company's probably going to sign you to a 2-year deal. Or if, say, the Olympics just happened and you're a top athlete and you're a stud, you'll probably get a 4-year deal with a company through the Olympics, because a lot of the bonuses, a lot of sort of the financial incentives are around the Olympics, because it's such a big deal for our sport, and world championships and sort of those are the high level races. But yeah, so that's how it works. My contract was rare because I was one of the first people ever that signed a pro high school deal. There was a few sprinters and there was a few female athletes that have done it, but even Alan Webb, who's sort of like, the legend of had all the high school records, he went to Michigan for a year, didn't work out, and then signed a pro contract with Nike. So sort of the route I took was a little different, and we've since then seen a few other people do it. Hobbs Kessler, who was 5th in the Olympics in the 1500, went pro.
Totally.
Josh Hoey, who just ran 143 in the 800, went pro out of high school. Ironically, all Adidas athletes, which is cool. That's a really long running contract. And running's weird because a lot of careers, the longer you stay in the career, the more money you make, because, you're working up and you're taking on more responsibility. Running sort of the opposite. People get really excited about you when you're young, and then the older you get, you're kind of kicked to the curb, and you're old news. And so obviously running's gotten a little bit better with, the financial situation. And I feel like companies are really actually supporting people and allowing them to, be professionals. And we can't be professionals if we're not getting paid livable wages, obviously.
Totally. Yeah. So nowadays it's completely different than the landscape was 10 years ago. You've got the introduction of the NIL money coming in. How much of your experience was dictated purely by the dollars and cents that someone like Adidas is coming in offering versus just the opportunity to race professionally? Because nowadays you have the NIL situation where a company like On, Adidas, or Nike can come in, sponsor a collegiate athlete for probably similar value to whatever you were getting paid as a high schooler, and they can still have that college experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that something that, I love sort of the quote, there are no solutions, there's only trade-offs. And I completely feel this way about sort of, the whole landscape of NIL deals and running. When you're a college kid, you have the best setup you're probably ever going to get. Even the top dogs have to figure out their physios, have to figure out their strength coaches. Everything in college is given to you. You're told when to get on your flights. Your flights are paid for. So if you're a college kid, sign an NIL deal, get a degree, have teammates, have a coach, have a strength coach, have all the facilities you need, have all your travel paid for, and save or invest that money that you're getting, and you'll come out of college in a really good spot. That wasn't the case when I was, and that's probably what I would have explored if I was, looking back on things. But I also just think college kids are super valuable. I mean, NCAA sports people love them. So I think, like I was saying earlier, a lot of your value is tied to your age in our sport. And so like the younger you are, and if you're, really killing it out on the cross country course or on the track, like that's when you have to capitalize and have to make the most of, your financial situation. Yeah, it's super positive for running as a whole. I mean, you look at like Parker Valby or Nico Young, like these athletes are offering so much value, and I think, they're getting paid correlate to what their value is, to what they're bringing to the sport. So that's really cool. He didn't mention himself when I asked him who the most talented athlete was in town, but I would put Morgan Pearson in that running for sure. This is one of the strongest and most talented dudes that I've ever been around. He has the qualities to be able to make the Olympic triathlon team twice and secure 2 medals, but also has the talent to be able to run with some of the best professional runners in the world, and we dive into that in this episode. Cool. I want to just talk a little bit. I have a whole line of questions here about like your maybe marriage or collaboration between running at a high level and doing triathlon. So you just ran a 61-minute half marathon in Valencia, which is like, that's professional running time. Yeah. That's very, very competitive.
When did you decide that you were going to maybe incorporate some more running into what you're doing? I guess in like the last couple,
like running races.
Yeah, like running races, or like the cross country championships you've done in the winter and stuff. Like, when did that sort of? Why was triathlon maybe? How did you feel did you feel as if that was going to be an addition to your triathlon thing, or is it its own thing?
Well, I think each running race is kind of its own unique thing. So, for example, I ran U.S. cross country in January, and I took all of October off, and I got, to be honest, I put on a little bit of weight and got out of shape, and I wasn't. The first WTS was in March, but it's in Abu Dhabi, and since I already qualified for Paris, I was like, I don't want to fly out there. I want to just, that's a lot. It's a lot of travel to go out there for a sprint distance race. The year before I went out there and I got COVID, and I want to optimize for Paris, whatever. So in that case, I almost just wanted something to sign up for and get me motivated to train, and it served its purpose. I mean, I was training as a triathlete, so that one was a little more like, this is kind of just it's I could train without a race, but it does help to have something on the calendar and get excited, especially in those winter months, shorter days, and obviously the summer just feels so far away. Like for me it was like almost a motivation thing.
Sure.
The half, that one was, that was more like I actually had a goal in mind, and it was after the Olympics, and I wanted to go there, and I enjoy it. To be honest, I enjoy it. It was after the Olympics, so I felt a little bit, maybe did it take away from triathlon? I don't think so. I mean, it was after the WTS, the final, and I don't think it really took anything away. I actually swam and biked, quite well there. So the run was actually the one that was not good. So yeah, I don't think it took anything away, but that was more just, I want to, see what I can do in a fast half. It was one of those things where the grand final was in Spain and Valencia was the weekend after. And I remember seeing that on the calendar, maybe like in June or something, like way before, and just being like, ooh, like that could be really cool. So each running race is kind of its own. It's not like I'm, it's like I need to run this time to be in this shape to run this time off the bike. It's more just each is unique.
Yeah. Are you doing anything in training in preparation for these races? Like, even if it's subconsciously or in the back of your mind, like in the build up to the grand final in Valencia, are you out there doing your 4-3-2-1 run and thinking, I got to push this a little bit?
It's funny because I mean, I would say when I was swimming, I was focused on the final. When I was biking, I was focused on the final. When I was, trying to eat healthy in the gym, go to bed on time, whatever, all that stuff, I was focusing on the final. But when I was running, I was focused on Valencia.
Yeah, for sure.
Like in that, from like Paris until, when I took a little break to like doing those races, it was like when I was in the run workouts, like that was my focus, if I'm being honest. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Was there any moment, or in reflection, have there been moments where you're thinking about your training and you're beating other high-class professional runners, like at the cross-country championship or at Valencia, and thinking like there's something to triathlon training that's allowing me to be really competitive off not professional running mileage?
Yeah. I think that's a really, that's a great question. And I think the answer is not crystal clear to me, because there is aspects of triathlon training that I think really do, help me excel as a runner. But there's also aspects of triathlon, being a triathlon training, that I think detract from being a good runner. Let's just like physics, like carrying around 12 pounds of, upper body muscle is, that's helping me swim and I need it for the triathlon. But like, just from a physics, like that's not helping me run. Like, let's just be honest.
Yeah.
So, but I'm also getting in, however many more hours in the pool on the bike that I, non-weight bearing, quote unquote cross training.
Sure.
So I think it's a nuanced question, and I don't have a perfect answer, but it's let's put it this way. If I ran, I'm running 50 to 60 miles a week and didn't do the cross training, I don't think I'd be running, getting fourth in US cross or, running 61. But if I was purely focused on running, maybe doing a little cross training as kind of a complementary piece, I think I could run faster than what I am. So
our final episode of 2024 was with Precision Fuel and Hydration founder Andy Blau. It was really cool to be able to understand how to build a business, how he's built up Precision from the ground to where it is today, and sort of just get his take on something he's super passionate about and that I'm obviously very passionate about as well, endurance sports. One thing that I've really noticed and admired about Precision, and we've worked with you guys for quite some time, my wife Jeannie and I, and we've seen sort of like the evolution of your brand and this big takeoff. I would say probably in the last like 4 or 5 years, things have really sort of taken off, and maybe you can speak to that a little bit in a bit. But I'm curious if there was anything that you guys did from a branding perspective or a marketing perspective that really allowed you to take big jumps at one time.
Yeah, a lot of people have said exactly what you've said, which is really nice to hear, that we seem to have really taken off in the last 4 years, and in some ways we have, because we've kind of been on this sort of slightly kind of exponential growth path for a little while, with the size of the business almost sort of doubling year on year, and that doesn't really get on anyone's radar while you're tiny. Because doubling is still significant, but it's kind of insignificant in the bigger scheme of things when you're tiny anyway. But you get to a certain point where actually, if you can keep that momentum up, then all of a sudden people are like, "Wow, you're kind of everywhere." Yeah. I think there's two totally different things though that have helped us to get that presence. Really, the first one was that up until 2021, we were just precision hydration, and we were just doing hydration products and sweat testing, which was a growing niche, but it's still a niche within a niche. We were getting asked about fueling all the time, but we weren't ready to take the step to do it. COVID and having time back at base, we weren't traveling, and we had to really think about what the next phase of the business looked like, meant that we launched the fuel products. And launching those, we were very fortunate in that over 10 years of having a hydration business, we'd got a loyal customer base. And we got immediate adoption by people that were using the hydration products of the fueling products. And then we kind of figured out along the way that actually people do tend to use way more fueling products way more regularly than they do hydration. So that was a big lever that we were able to pull by having a customer base and giving them a product. Most of it, I would say almost everyone who was buying a hydration product from us was buying a gel from someone else. And so there was like a big opportunity there for us to say, well, you trust us with your hydration. Maybe you can now trust us with your fueling. The second one is kind of the thing that's, I'll point at it up behind my head, is the color stripes, which is like a thing that came from working. My brother does a lot of our graphics and design. He's very creative. And early on, we'd designed the products to have the 4 original hydration products were green for 250, yellow for 500, orange for 1,000, and purple for 1,500. And the colors get a little bit more darker and intense as you go through, and that was deliberate. But we'd never used it as part of the brand. They were just colors. And then we I can't even remember exactly how it happened, but we put the color bands on a hat. And then all of a sudden, like, everybody wanted the hat, everyone that we met. And we were like, this is something. If people want it. And then we started to incorporate it in more places. And then it became part of the logo eventually. And now I think, I literally had a tear in my eye at Kona this year, because I stood in transition area, like looking around at the bikes on race morning, and like I couldn't look anywhere without seeing those bottles and I was like, wow, we've arrived here now. If there was a bottle count, I think we'd have won it, or certainly we have in terms of being noticeable. And so, yeah, it's with a lot of pride that we see the color stripes around, and I think they are just pretty unique.